Hey everybody, this is Jake Schlenker, insurance advisor at Couch Bronsdorf. My role for the past 20 years at Couch has been to create insurance and risk management programs. And I wanted to sit today to introduce Eric Wistrand, our IT director and chief information officer. Eric and I have worked on a number of accounts, helping our accounts to solve problems from a cyber perspective when it comes to, the risk management plan overall. And I just wanted to, go over some of the key elements, the exposures in the industry, what we should be looking at when it comes to all things cyber. So welcome, Eric.
Hey, thanks, Jake. Appreciate you inviting me to chat. My name is Eric Wistrand. I am CIO of Couch Bronsdorf. I've been at Couch for about 14 years. I've been in IT and IT security over the last 17 years. And recently, about 4 years ago, started the groundwork to create Couch Bronsdorf's cyber risk practice group. So really appreciate you having me on to chat, Jake, and hope we can talk through some of the cyber risks impacting small and medium-sized businesses. We might just want to kick it off with that. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Obviously, there's been a lot of change over the past couple of years, and we just wanted to dive into some of that with you. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pull up a slide here in the background, but while I'm doing that, I think we all understand that the risks in the news cycle and the breaches that you hear about from many of the big firms. And when I say big firms, I'm talking about the massive either domiciled in the U.S. or global multinational companies like Target, Home Depot, MGM, United Healthcare, all experiencing very large information security breaches, right? And I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of those breaches, but right now I'm just going to show you a slide about growing vulnerabilities, right? So what you can see here are a graph since 2010 of CVEs, and CVEs are common vulnerabilities and exposures. There's a database that tracks all this information that is part of NIST. They maintain that database, and essentially what's in that database is each record or line item that's in there is the analysis of a system vulnerability. And so what happens is a vulnerability is discovered, it's made public, the manufacturer releases a patch to that vulnerability and then encourages everyone using that software to apply that patch or that workaround or that fix as quickly as possible.
Okay, so Eric, this is what happens on my computer once a week or every once in a while. The updates that are coming in are really patches that are fixing potential or exposures, ways that hackers have figured out how to get into the system to create vulnerabilities, more to expose vulnerabilities, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So if we go back to 2010, you see just under 5,000 vulnerabilities that were newly released on that list. And for a period of time, it was kind of a sideways moving type graph, and then a really big jump in 2017 and what looks like exponential growth since then. And so what's really scary is that in 2023 versus 2022, there was a 15% increase. And already in 2024, we have metrics that suggest it's on about a 25% increase over the prior year.
Okay.
So what does all that mean for a business owner? Essentially, that means that your systems that you're using on a daily basis, and we have to think about systems as a few different subsets. So you have, in a typical network, you have your servers, you have your desktops, and you have maybe mobile users that might be on their personal cell phones, right? And so everywhere you have an endpoint, right? And an endpoint is like a network device that somebody's interacting with. You know, one of your staff has a laptop, they have a cell phone, they may even have a desktop in addition to all that. All of those endpoints need regular patching. And so what is happening is these vulnerabilities become public. They may have been known about before. They may have been exploited by threat actors before. But as soon as they're made public, we have to be very conscious of applying patches. Otherwise, our systems become unnecessarily exposed, right? And the effect of that exposure is not only does your business become put at risk because a hacker could get in and deploy ransomware, which encrypts all your data. They could also steal your data and then sell it on the dark web. So all of that customer personally identifiable information and your staff's personally identifiable information, if you happen to be in the healthcare space and you have PHI or healthcare related information, that information as well becomes at risk because of these vulnerabilities that are left open, right? So Jake, you know, we tend to throw around a lot of these acronyms like CVEs, and you know, a little bit later on we'll talk MFA and EDR and SRP. I'm trying to remove all of the techno barf that usually comes out when you talk about these things from an IT perspective and make it really simple.
That's great because, you know, from an insurance perspective, having been in the business for 20 years, 20 plus years, I guess now, it's actually my birthday today.
Happy birthday, Jake.
Yeah, thank you. From a technical perspective, cyber is a little bit of a different exposure, you know, that becomes, I don't want to say techno, you know, you have to kind of understand the IT world in order to protect and ultimately, you know, also to ensure, because underwriters, you know, don't just want to throw out a policy and a limit. They really want to make sure that we understand the exposures and that we're, you know, solving those exposures to prevent and reduce the exposure to the insurance company as we go on. So it's really crucial to have, you know, discussions around all this stuff. So I thank you for not using the techno speak that you know, sometimes tricks us all up. So
yeah. So Jake, I'm going to get into some data we have around cyber breaches and some fears that business owners have, right, regarding them. So here's a study that Allianz did when asking business owners about, and this is a broad mix of business owners that are either executives at very large businesses or business owners of smaller firms. When asked, you know, which causes of business interruption does your company fear the most, right? And so the question is specific about what could interrupt our business in such a way where we're not able to service customers, right? Mm-hmm. And the clear largest item is cyber incidents, right? And that is above energy crisis issues, natural catastrophes, fire, explosion, or supplier failure, right?
Yep. I think it may be fair to say, Eric, though, that graph is a little bit more skewed to the larger customer than to, you know, the small to medium-sized business, you know, owner. And I think that's sure one of the reasons why I wanted to have this discussion with you today, because I think that cyber, to a degree, is understood from a true risk perspective, and that many of our small businesses and medium-sized businesses are starting to think about it, have thought about it, but you know, the exposure becomes larger every year to a degree. And for the small business owner, he may not even be thinking about cyber yet, but it's a real concern to every business owner.
Yeah, and let's talk about the types of businesses, right? So
sure.
IBM did a great study digging into the costs of data breach in a particular set of industries, right? And what they found is in aggregate, and this is big guys, small guys, everybody in the middle in terms of size of business, right? This is the average cost in millions of dollars of a data breach in each industry.
Yeah.
Looked at 2022 versus 2023. So we see a little bit of trending, right? But let's focus on the large picture right now. Clearly, by almost a factor of 2 over everything else, healthcare is the industry that has the largest cost per data breach, right?
Okay.
Largest average cost. And most of what's driving that is the record count and the level of personally identifiable and health information, PHI and PII that's in there.
Sure. A hospital has millions of records.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So anything in the healthcare space is going to be of significantly higher breach potential cost, right? And so then we think about, after that, we see financial services, pharmaceutical, energy, industrial technology, professional services, et cetera, right? So those top 6, 7 areas are, pretty much encompassing the majority of our mid-market customers, right?
Yes.
And what you can see in many of those categories, you see some very close relationships between 2022 cost and 2023 cost. In healthcare, rising significantly, right? I want to think about, just for a second, what is the cost of a data breach? So let's say that you come into work on a Friday morning and you're the first one in the office. You open up your computer and you notice that you can't open any of your documents, right? And so the first thing that you think of is you call your IT person, say, hey, Bob, I can't access any of my files. What's going on? And the IT person goes, hold on, let me look at it. And after a little bit of investigation, you realize, and the IT person realizes, that your system has been encrypted with ransomware.
Yes.
Right. And so that could have come in through a number of different avenues. We're not going to get into that now, but we're going to talk about what happens right at the point of realizing you have a breach, right? So at that point, if you don't have cyber liability insurance, you're going to try and rely on your own in-house IT people to fix it for you. And it's going to take a very long time, because in order to do what's called incident response, or this detection and escalation component, right? You're going to have some really specialized talent from your IT people to dig in, figure out where the ransomware came from, figure out if the threat actors or the hackers are still in your systems. And then, assuming that your systems are completely locked up, you may not be able to conduct business for a period of time. So the clock starts ticking on lost business and the cost of that.
It almost sounds like the majority of our customers, which are not Fortune 1000 companies, by any stretch of the imagination, probably don't have the technical expertise, in-house, or even in the case of outsourcing to an MSC and an MSP, managed service provider, they may not have the technical expertise for this type of work. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why there's specialized firms. They're called incident response firms.
Okay.
That do this work day in and day out, right? And I'm very familiar with several of the firms in that space. And at any one point in time, they're dealing with between 50 and 70 data breaches that are ongoing, right? And those guys are pros. What they do is they come in remotely. You deploy a software to your computers, and it helps them to compartmentalize the data breach and do some forensic work to figure out how it happened. And then if you have a real ransomware issue going on, they'll negotiate with the threat actors on your behalf and work on the ransom amount. But what I wanted to show is that when we think cyber liability insurance, we usually refer to it as just that, cyber liability. The reality is the cyber insurance policy comes in two parts. There's a first party set of contract language, and then there's a third party set of language. Mm-hmm. And so I view cyber liability insurance as a bit of a misnomer. Cyber liability really is in two separate buckets. One is the incident response and helping you get back in business and online, mm-hmm. and providing a segment of business interruption coverage to help you for all those situations where you were out of business and you might have lost revenue or incurred extra costs through that time. Okay. But then there's the third party side, which is really the cyber liability side, which is any regulatory fines and penalties, any notification costs you might incur, and any duty to third parties you may have breached because of the data breach that caused you to lose their data, right?
The moral of the story is these claims can get pretty expensive pretty quick, as can, the need to hire experts to be able to do this technical deep dive into figuring out through the log activity and all how the threat, came about, how the exposure came about, and to get us up and running again, to get our customers up and running again. So, having an insurance policy kind of brings in that whole, plate of services at that point to get you up and running. Because if I can't access my data for a week, it could put businesses out of business,
Totally. And it has a significant reputational impact.
Sure.
That, if you're let's say a 10-person law firm, right? Mm-hmm. And you can't get back to your clients or access your data for a week and a half. And because of that, you miss a particular court date or a filing deadline or something like that.
Sure.
There's a real impact.
Yep.
To your customers and your reputation, right? And so that's why that financial vehicle is there with insurance to help you through that process. But I want to talk about sizing for particular data breach type events, right? And I want to not think about the benchmarks that are done on a very large company basis. We'll talk about more what a data breach might look like for like a LabCorp type business that does diagnostics on,
but not
blood.
LabCorp itself. I mean, LabCorp itself is you're talking about
owned,
an independent lab. Okay,
exactly. So small shop does, let's say, $15 million in revenue, right?
Okay.
What does that look like? So I'm going to share this one slide here that is a data breach calculator. And essentially what we do is we go in and we say, all right, how many records were exposed? So this particular firm has about 1 million records of personally identifiable information and PHI. And PHI is the health-related data, right?
Sure.
And so we've configured this in such a way where, it's the organization's first breach. The data was stored in a centralized location. Do we expect fraud? Yes. Is a class action lawsuit expected? Yes, right? And so we can model this in many different ways, but this is really like the worst case scenario, right?
Okay.
And so you have an incident investigation cost, which is a combination of engaging a law firm to represent you, a data breach focused law firm, engaging incident response to get to the bottom of how the breach occurred and stop it. And then you go on to the second section here, which is customer notification and crisis management, because when those records are stolen, you can confirm that you have a duty to go and notify those particular customers, right, or previous customers. Uh-huh. And so there's a significant cost for that, in addition to the regulatory fines and penalties, because across the U.S. and all 50 states, there's 50 different versions of data privacy regulations that you have to comply with, right?
Okay.
So then, there's a class action lawsuit line item here, and this is something that's probably in terms of likelihood far less likely, but it's important to understand what the impact of it could be.
Sure.
But you total all those up and you get to a total cost, right, of $12,400,000. And this is like an absolute lights out, worst case scenario data breach. It's what I kind of refer to as a 1 in 100-year data breach.
Okay.
And we try not to size for that in terms of limits. But what we try to do instead is think about what maybe a 1 in 10-year loss is. And so you can see that with the same sort of configuration, this is a client in a healthcare type industry. They have about 57 employees, about 20 million in revenue, and they have 1 million records of PHI. You know, you'll see here that first of all, their likelihood, even if they have strong security practices, their likelihood is about 1.5 times higher than their peers, mostly because in the healthcare industry, it demands very high best-in-class security practices. And so what you can see is the median loss, like the typical ransomware loss, it's going to be quite small. It's going to be maybe $280,000.
Yeah.
But ransomware comes in many flavors. So when you think about cyber extortion, there's a single extortion event, which is the threat actors get onto your computers and they encrypt your data. Well, a double extortion event is when the threat actors get onto your computer, they take your data, and then they encrypt the data they left behind.
Okay.
So
now they've stolen your data and encrypted the stuff that they decided to leave behind.
Right. Right. Now, and things can get even worse if you're a big enough target and you don't play ball and pay the ransom.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a third layer of extortion, which is a DDoS attack. So a distributed denial of service attack that essentially locks up your internet connection and your ability to communicate.
Okay.
Right. And then there's a fourth layer, which is somewhat unlikely. We've seen this in a couple interesting cases, but where they've stolen your data, they will then go out and reach out to your customers as you, right, and try to defraud them. Okay, wow. So there's a lot of scary things that can happen here. But as we think about modeling for losses, we have to take into account how many employees, how much revenue, and really most importantly, how much in terms of records of PHI, PII, and PCI for your customers, your current customers, and your prior customers, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, this stuff is all good, Eric, and it will keep some people up at night, but our clients, by and large, are not buying $12 million worth of cyber liability insurance, at this point. My hope is that the customers that, we do have coverage for, that they're taking it serious. And, part of what we see is when you and I work together with the CFO, with the owner of our businesses, that we're insuring, it helps to create a plan. And sometimes that plan is even then implemented with the MSP or the internal IT people so that we go from point A to point B. And that really becomes, perhaps the most important aspect of the whole cyber process, I think, because I think a lot of businesses, have legacy systems, people who have been in place handling IT for a long time. And I don't want to say they do some things, with blinders on, but I have seen situations where, it's cousin John, who's always handled the IT and he does a good job, but we're not thinking in the same way of where we need to be from a cyber perspective.
Jake,
at that
your point,
yeah,
you just don't know what you don't know.
You don't,
right?
Exactly.
So as we've gone through and done boots on the ground incident response with customers throughout the past couple of years, I've realized that it's important to share those findings with our current customers so they have a better understanding of the risk landscape out there. And that's why we're happy to chat about it.
So, Eric, as we continue, one of the things that we kind of, talked a little bit about was policies and procedures and controls that matter when it comes to, businesses and the IT departments that, have some responsibility in addition to, the CFO and the risk management team, at our customers. Can you talk to, us a little bit about just the current state of where things are at from a procedural perspective, from a policy perspective, from an internal IT mindset perspective, of where all these exposures come together.
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. So, high level, right? We see businesses of all shapes and sizes, and within those, regardless of industry, we start to see different levels of maturity in terms of their focus on information security, right? So you may have, a smaller firm, startup firm, not many employees, everybody's bringing their own device into the workplace. They don't really have dedicated IT support. They don't have anybody responsible for their information security, right? That's on one hand. On the other hand, we see firms that are a little larger, a little bit more sophisticated. They have either an in-house IT person or they have a managed service provider on the outside. They're starting to take security more seriously, but maybe it's been one of those things. Yeah, the MSP has come in, they've suggested some controls that should be implemented through time, and it just really hasn't been in the budget. So the IT budget kind of jumps along like this.
Yeah.
And I say this, Joe, because Jake used to be my boss, right? And we've
That's
had these
not true, Eric. We worked together, didn't we?
I know.
So yeah.
We've had these conversations over the years where, we've had discussions on infrastructure spending, right? And we've had to prioritize because every business has to prioritize their spending, right? And so we've had a bunch of things on the plate, and it just at one point wasn't the right time. So we had to implement in stages, right? And there's a stage of development that everybody goes through, right? When we tend to talk to businesses and we assess their controls, we also start to ask, what's your IT spending been like over the course of the past 5 years? Where do you think it's going, right? And that helps us to understand how the ownership of the firm is viewing information security. Is it a competitive advantage for them, right? Is it something that's there because it has to be, and regulatory wise, we just have to comply? Or is security something that gets in the way and it's way too expensive, we don't want to spend money on it, right? Wherever you're at in that journey, our goal is to help educate and help you mature your systems to build layers, essentially, of security controls that act like bulletproof glass, right? So one layer of glass isn't very protective, but you put 5 layers together and now you have some protection, right?
And Eric, fair to say, I mean, you and I will get on a call with the MSP, with our customers, really any time to go through that current state to where we need to be. I've done that with you, on 12 different occasions, for different customers over the past year.
Yeah, and so our role in that regard is to understand the various players of the organization as it relates to who's responsible for IT now, who in the stakeholders of the organization from an ownership perspective are involved, and help everybody better understand the overall risk landscape and then where their controls are now and where they should be as they make improvements, right? And so part of that, right, is understanding what are the controls that really matter as it relates to protecting information. And so you'll see I've highlighted a couple areas here. In deep red, you see, in bright red, you'll see things like multi-factor authentication for email access and VPN access. Basically, what I'm saying here is you want to be able to limit brute force attacks where somebody is trying, a whole bunch of passwords to log into your systems, right? And if they happen to get the right password, you want a second layer of authentication, like a text message to your cell phone to validate that it's you with a code, like logging into your bank account, right?
Sure, I was just thinking that.
Yeah, so that's one area where especially insurance carriers, are now requiring that. But it's just good practice for network security. And you're seeing it happen in your personal life. You go to log into your Gmail account, they want you to enable two-factor authentication. You log into your bank, it's the same thing. So that's multi-factor authentication. The next critical control is really having secure backups, right? Because you never know when you might have your laptop fail on you, right? You might have one of the disk drives in your server at your office fail. And you want to have a good backup of that you can restore quickly. And not only do you want that backup to be done on site, you want it replicated off site, and you want it to be immutable. So if you were to get hacked, the threat actor couldn't just simply delete your backups.
Okay, right? So then that was going to be my question. Why do we need all this cyber protection if we have backups, of all our data?
Because threat actors are really smart. Okay. Right. And when they when they are able to gain access to your systems, they're often going through a set of stages, right? So they're, first of all, gaining access to your system in some form or fashion. Then they're being very quiet for a period of time and kind of hanging out and scoping to see what your system is, right? They want to know what they have gained access to. Okay. And they're going to develop a plan. So while they're looking at your systems and you don't know they're there, they're going to inventory and see that you have 10 servers and 600 laptops and desktops, right? And they're going to start to say, okay, let's look at those servers and let's see if we can gain access to the files, right? Okay. Now let's see, how are those servers being backed up? Because if we're going to be successful in deploying ransomware, we need to make sure that we get rid of the backups. Otherwise, no one's ever going to pay us as hackers. Does that make sense? Right? Yeah. So that's why having backups that are redundant, like a former coworker we used to have, Jake, that would wear a belt and suspenders, right? It's important to make sure if your belt fails, you have your suspenders to hold your pants up, right? The idea is that with backups, it's the same idea. You want to have a redundant system that not only backs your data up through one method, but backs it up through another method, and the resulting backup is immutable. It can't be changed. It can't be deleted, right? Yeah, so it sounds like the people who are doing this, Eric, are not, some guy sitting in his parents' basement, and I know the answer to this. I mean, these organizations are sophisticated operations, often in the Eastern Bloc, and the like. And there are people like you and I who go to work, but they don't work at a normal retail, legitimate business. They go to an office that is hacking central, and that's what they do. Jake, they have layers of management, right? They have bosses. They have performance reviews, right? Yeah. They're incentivized based upon the dollar value disgorged from the particular I'll call them client, but from the hacked entity, and they're paid a percentage of that ransom, right? Wow. And it's not just as simple as that. You could think about it like they're like little tiny consulting organizations that get together in an office and somewhere in an old Soviet bloc country, right? In an office. So the reality is you have multiple different parties involved. You have what's called access brokers, right? And access brokers are out using automated tools to hack systems and get access. And then they'll sell that access to a threat actor that buys a piece of software to do the ransom.
That's just crazy. So
if you look at the value chain here, and I have a slide on this, but I want to keep this focused on controls. If you look at the value chain, there's probably between 5 and 10 different distinct entities involved in one particular data breach, right? Wow. All on the dark web, all coordinating together and revenue sharing in this big, hacker consulting conspiracy, right? So it's not just, a guy that lives in his parents' basement that hasn't left his parents' basement in many, many years and is, snacking on Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew. It's not like that, right?
Yeah.
It's much more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And so we talked about secure backups and the importance of that. The other one I want to touch on here is ensuring that critical patches are applied within 48 hours.
Sure.
And so that could be 48 hours, could be 7 days, could be 2 weeks. You know, whatever your patching strategy is, make sure that you have a patching strategy and you have sufficient reporting to make sure that it's being done, right?
Do you think that covers 50% of the potential exposure, just making sure that your patches are kept up to date?
It limits the cross section. So we talk about this thing called ASM, which is attack surface management.
Okay.
And so if if I'm a business and I have no patching within the last year, I'm at a significantly higher risk than the same business that has the opposite of that and is patching within 7 days.
Okay.
Right.
So those three things of MFA, secure backups, and patching, that's top level. That's 90% of the game.
Well, those are the things that I'm prioritizing first. And I'm saying, if you haven't done these things yet, get them done. Right. Okay. And then you move on to kind of a phase two. And phase two is endpoint detection and response. So using a tool or a service like Huntress or CrowdStrike or SentinelOne. And these guys are managed security services providers. So they're MSSPs. Okay. They're big software vendors that have incredible analytics, high quality staff, and they put a little program on your computer that monitors what's happening. And what they look for is indicators of compromise, which means, a threat actor or hacker has gotten onto your computer and they're doing something, right? Okay. But it's not the work that you're doing, because that's, you don't want them to flag that. You want them to flag the stuff that looks really nefarious, right?
So that's a third-party kind of monitoring service that's in our network, on our systems, detecting and monitoring, kind of the network traffic to see if they can find something from the outside that doesn't look right.
Yeah, exactly. And they're security pros. I mean, these guys are highly sophisticated. They're almost what you would consider to be white hat hackers. So black hat hackers do bad things. The white hat hackers are kind of the good guys, right? Okay. If you were to think of them in red team and blue team, they're the blue team, and the red team are the outside threat actors, right? The other thing is software restricted policies. So out of the last 30 businesses that I reviewed in 2023, there was only one that had a strong set of software restricted policies. And basically what that says is it is a whitelist of software that can run on their corporate computers. Mm-hmm. And only that software could run. So for instance, you want people to be able to access Zoom meetings or WebEx meetings or GoToMeeting, right? You would whitelist that specifically. But you wouldn't allow somebody to install, let's say, Spotify on their computer, right? Okay. Or you wouldn't allow somebody to download like a file sharing service on their computer, right? And so what that tends to do is when your users get a phishing email and it asks them to click a link, they click on that link and it tries to run software on their computer and it can't run because it's blocked by default.
Ah, okay. Right. Understood.
That is a very important control that limits, and without exaggeration, 95% of the threats that may come in through phishing.
Okay.
Right. The other thing is when we think about our users, right? It's email security training. Mm-hmm. It's testing your users to see if they can spot a phishing email, and then counseling them and helping them if they happen to get duped by it, right? Giving them some training to prevent that sort of thing. And so when I'm going to switch topics just for a second to talk about access audits. This is part of a larger picture of penetration testing. If you're an entity in New York, there's going to be a requirement that you have a regular penetration test done on your systems, both from the outside and from the inside. It also is going to force you to be more diligent about access audits. So if we were to look at an example firm, Jake, you and I went in and said, show me a copy of all of the active users in your computer network, right? And we're going to compare that to your active employees. And I'm betting that we find a couple active users that are terminated employees, right? Very important to terminate access immediately upon dismissing an employee. And what we find is a lot of businesses aren't doing that. And that leaves open attack surface for a threat actor to log in and impersonate that employee. So a couple other things here: mobile device management, disk encryption, preventing the idea if I'm going with you, Jake, to visit a client in the city, we both have our laptops, I leave mine on the train. Well, if I can prove that it was encrypted with BitLocker, right, then it's very, very unlikely that somebody's going to be able to pull data off that computer.
Okay.
Right. And so that's why disk encryption is so important, because if you didn't have that, any data that was on that computer, now I have to treat that as if a threat actor has access to it, and I have to notify my customers that data may be gone. Right. The other component of this is implementing some sort of data loss prevention. Right. And this is where we think about internal bad actors or just internal staff that haven't been as careful with technology. So, for instance, you have somebody in your HR team that emails a spreadsheet of all your staff members, and it has their social security numbers and dates of birth on it. Right. Data loss prevention tools would stop that from going outside of your email filters. Right.
Okay. So that's the email filter that, when I, put in there, and it's got somebody's social security number, in the body of the email, it blocks it from going out.
Yeah. It tells you, hey, I blocked this, and you have to find a secure method to send it. So you can send it via secure email, and that's fine. But it tries to limit that from going in plain text email, right? And there's a reason that's particularly low on the priority list as it relates to this conversation. It's because everything else is so much more important as it relates to limiting attack surface, right?
Sure.
So that's a quick overview, Jake, of controls that matter from our perspective. The real risk assessment that we do is quite a bit more detailed than that, and we tend to focus heavily on a few areas. One of which being, who's responsible for the technology, what are their processes and procedures, and how does the firm overall approach security, and what have they implemented? How mature are they? And so the output of that conversation is a real life risk assessment that helps to then prioritize some next steps. And you and I both found that for a number of clients to be very helpful in helping them up their security game.
Oh, no question. Like I talked about, getting from point A to point B, and I don't think that most businesses go through that process with somebody looking at it from a security perspective often enough. And I think that there's sometimes, in some cases, a lack of knowledge from the accounting, from the risk management, senior management perspective, that doesn't necessarily know to be able to go to their IT people and say, hey, what about this? And the IT guys are just doing their thing on a daily basis, not being pushed to try to, perhaps elevate the level of security, on the network. Sometimes there's a little bit of money that has to be spent, or time, and sometimes it's hard to get guys like me, to be able to spend that money, right, Eric? So I'm kind of kidding. Eric and I used to go through, some of this stuff on an annual basis. And, it took me a while to really understand the potential, exposure. I remember having a discussion 10 years ago, or so. How long have you been with us, Eric?
14 years.
14 years. I mean, I remember having some discussions going back on this type of stuff about to that point, scratching my head and saying, what is this stuff? I mean, we don't need to be spending money on, cyber exposure. We have other, more valid areas where we need to spend, resources on. So, I've certainly, become more wise, because of, even in some cases, incidents where we've gotten customers who have been hit. So,
Yeah. No, Jake, to that point, I mean, and we'll close with this, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, what I learned, and this was probably 10 years ago, is that, if I'm not doing a good job portraying the value of a particular investment, then it's all going to come down to cost, right? And
Yeah.
the price is always going to be too high,
Sure.
right? Unless you understand the value that you're getting, right?
Mhm.
So as we have these discussions, and in our next conversation, we're gonna get into cyber coverages and limit benchmarking and some of that stuff. But it's good we're having these conversations because it helps to identify some of the unknown unknowns,
Yeah.
and to draw a better box around the risk and the value of not only the insurance but also the controls, right? So let's pause for now. We're going to get into our next discussion on cyber limits and benchmarking in our next video. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Great. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you. So, Eric, I just wanted to say thank you for joining me today to talk about, the exposure of cyber to, small and medium-sized businesses. I think that we did a good job. You did a great job of kind of highlighting the different topics, whether it's talking about, the actual exposures, how they've increased, talking about the specifics of, the systems internally, and then how do we protect that and what kind of insurance we can, obtain. So I just want to say thanks for, joining us today. And if anybody has any questions, Eric and I would be happy to, have conversations, with you about where you're at currently, about any of these topics, and whether that's with your IT team, without your IT team, we're here to help. We just want to, be resources for, for you all. And, so yeah, we're here. Happy to, assist in any way that we can. So Eric, thank you again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Jake. And, as we talk about cyber risks affecting small and medium-sized businesses, the question that tends to come up, because this tends to be a flood of information, right?
Yeah.
If you listen to this whole thing and you leave it and you go, where do I start? If people are thinking about the question, like, what should you do if you want to learn more about cyber risks and how your businesses can prepare for those risks, reach out to us. If you're interested in walking through our risk assessment, we'd be happy to do that. If you're interested in understanding, at what level your data security posture is and how you measure up, we'll be happy to give you an assessment of that. And if you're all geared up and want to talk about cyber liability insurance and you want to look at pricing, we're happy to do that as well. Overall, you could reach out to myself, you could reach out to Jake. We work together hand in hand on these things. Probably better to reach out to Jake, schedule time to talk about it. And Jake will loop me in at the appropriate time when we talk about cyber risks and benchmarking and limits and risk assessment stuff. Just feel free to reach out to us at any time. Thanks, Jake. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you. So talk soon.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.